going to go over how to make adjustments to renders uh, quickly. So let's imagine that you created this bird. This is actually an Eames bird that I've taken off the internet and I've rendered it on a blue background, and I've gave it this nice teal colour and I've added spots to it. But you could apply these techniques to other products that you've made. So for example, if you're making shoes or clothes or different types of variations in color or something, for product lines, you could use these techniques to vastly reduce the amount of time that you're spending on this while still getting good results. So let's imagine that we want to turn this into a red bird with green feet and make more of a natural green color. We can do that in Photoshop really easily. So we're going to use these blending modes along with some adjustment layers which are non-destructive, so you can see I can actually turn them off and turn them back on and add more, and I can add as many as I want. So what we'll do is we'll start with the image. So the first thing we're going to do is go down to here. These are where all of your adjustment layers are. So the first thing is we're going to adjust the levels. So I'll explain this to you. So this is what's known as a histogram. So anything to the left of this in this box represents the darks, and anything to the right represents the highlights, and anything in the middle represents the midtones, and then bottom is not very many, and at the top is a lot. So we can see in here I can't make it much bigger, but can I? No. So you can see in this image we haven't got very many blacks. The only black thing in this image is the eye, and that is represented by this very small white line there. And also we've got no highlights, as in pure whites. So this is pure white at this end and that's pure black. We've barely got any highlights. The only white parts in here are the spots, and they are not white. So if I just sample them and I go over to the colour, oh they are white, my bad. So they're not all completely white, but over here there's only a few of them which would represent the few spots that are actually pure white, which is up here, but there's not very many of them, which is why it doesn't have a spike. But what we do have in the image is a lot of mid-tones. So you can see obviously in the image we've got, if this was black and white, we've got a lot of mid-greys and slightly darker greys, and that's represented by these two spikes. So what we can do is we can drag this over and increase the lights, the threshold for the lights, so that brightens the image. So if we were to brighten it and then also darken the darker parts by bringing this up, we can see that this image now is a lot more contrasty. This bird stands out a lot more than it did. And if we wanted to turn that off, all we have to do is just do that. So now we've increased the contrast, so it's a lot more punchy, it stands out more. So if we go back to the original image, what we can do is we can change the colour of the background. We can do that by adding a Huesaturation adjustment layer. But what this does is if you move the hue slider left and right, you can see that that's adjusting the hue of the entire image. So if we wanted something more blue, we can do that. But obviously, as you notice, it is adjusting the bird as well as the background. So what if we wanted to just adjust the bird? So if we go down and then duplicate the layer, you can Command or Control J, that copies it. What we can do is then we can go over here and hit this button, which is the quick selection button. Now if we make sure it's on the selection and not the minus, we can select the parts of the image that we want to adjust. So if we just click and drag over the bird and then drag near the bottom. Now it's not perfect. So what it does is it samples nearby colours and adds that to the selection. But the issue we've got here is there's not much contrast in colour between this blue and that blue. Although we can discern it, it is just a computer, so we have to help it out a little bit. So if we hit the left square bracket key, make it smaller, we can add to the selection and just tell it we want this part to be included. Go a bit further down, and then add to the selection here. Let's missed a bit there, add that, missed the end of the nose. What it's done as well is, if we zoom in a bit further, we can see it's actually included part of the background. If we don't want that, we can hit the minus button and just use the right edge of the brush and take that away from the selection. So now you can see we've got a pretty rough selection. That's in there. See, it's missed the highlight, so we can add it back in. Now you can spend a lot of time on this. I'm just doing it quickly for time. That'll do. Right, so now we've selected the bird, we can hit the layer mask button. So what that's going to do is whatever was selected will be shown as white. Now white reveals and black conceals, so anything that's black in this mask will be hidden. Now you can't see it at the minute because I've got a duplicate underneath which doesn't have a mask in it, but you can see if I turn that off, we just have the bird left. So now what we can do is go back to the adjustment layers, add a hue saturation, but this time we're going to right click on the layer itself and then click create clipping mask. So what that's going to do is allow us to only adjust the mask of what we just selected. So if I just unclip or release the clipping mask and I adjust the hue, let's just say I wanted a green, you can see it's adjusted the whole image again, but if we right click and create clipping mask, it's only going to adjust that part of the selection that we just made. So now I've made a green bird, but if we zoom in, we can see that it's actually selected part of the leg which we didn't want. So if we go back to the mask and then hit B for brush on your keyboard, zoom in, and then make that smaller. Now if you hit D on the keyboard, we've got two white colours, we don't want that, so we click D. That turns it back into the default colours, black and white. Now we want to paint with a black brush, so you can either click there or hit X on your keyboard. Now if you paint with a black brush, you can see we're actually adjusting this layer selection mask. So you see this is where I'm painting. And I'm just painting out the part because I don't want this leg to be green, I want it to be blue. So I'm just carefully painting around the leg. Now you can see that looks a lot better. Now that was pretty much everything. I don't think there's anything else. I've just put them side by side. But that was it. So if you want to make any adjustments, you can then, let's say you just save this as a JPEG, so that's one example of what this product could look like. Let's say you wanted a purple bird with a that should be there. With a purple bird. With a nice green background. I mean, you shouldn't mix green and purple, but I'll do red. You can also increase the saturation of that background by moving up the saturation. So there's another example where you could save that JPEG. This saves you a lot of time because you don't have to go back to the rendering engine that you use, whether it's Keyshot, Blender or Fusion. You don't have to go back and manually edit all of this. You can quickly make these changes, save it as a JPEG, make another change, save it as a JPEG. So that does save you a lot of time and you get a lot of different options for your products. So that's a quick overview on how to change the hue and saturation.